Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Well, BC gets a $2 billion federal boost on its plans for housing, and that includes a new co-op development in Vancouver. We'll take your reaction on that and all the big pronouncements on housing this BC budget week. What impact will they have on you? And what do you need to take that financial pressure off? After 12:30, we stay on finances, and we'll ask you, how do you talk about money as a couple? Michelle Eliot here. Welcome to BC Today. Thanks for joining us on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on the CBC News app, cbc.ca/BC, and on YouTube as well. Just look for CBC Vancouver. Interestingly, a Stats Canada survey from 2021 and 2022 found renters report lower life satisfaction, including difficulty meeting financial needs. Younger Canadians face more of those challenges, including Vancouver residents, and this survey has just been published. Housing is clearly still the biggest cost pressure on British Columbians. And today, Premier David Eby stood flanked by Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and other politicians, and they announced federal dollars for the BC government's BC Builds program that they announced last week. It builds middle-income housing on underused municipal lands. And he added that there is now another development earmarked for this program, a new co-op housing development. Here's the Premier.
What the Prime Minister has announced today, $2 billion in additional funding for the BC Builds program, will be transformational for thousands of families in British Columbia that are desperate for housing. They can afford housing. They just need it to be available. This money will make it available for them, and we'll continue to work through the system again and again to support more and more people going forward. We said that BC Builds was a program constructed to grow, and it is growing massively today. Prime Minister, thank you to you and the federal government for stepping up in this way. An important element of today's announcement is the third BC Builds site that we are announcing. Fourth? It's happening quickly. The fourth BC Builds site that we're announcing, a beautiful new co-op in Yaletown, 112 units, close to park and transit. Construction expected to start this summer. This is on land owned by the City of Vancouver. Thank you, Mayor Sim, for your amazing work at the city to partner with us to identify this land, to commit to the fast tracking on the permits to get this built. It is going to be an amazing thing for so many families. I know so many folks who have heard of someone or who knows someone who lives in a co-op. They're like, how did you get that? How did you get that actually affordable, stable place to live, that community for you and your family? We're building co-ops again together, thanks to the leadership of the federal government and the City of Vancouver as well.
We're taking your calls on this in a moment. First, what's your reaction to this? A new co-op development, a 9-story building with 112 new co-op homes for middle-income households. And how do these housing announcements impact your needs? What do you need to take that housing cost pressure off? Relieve some of that stress. Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690. If you're using your cell phone, you can also email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. Well, first up for his reaction to this morning's announcement, we've reached Tom Armstrong of the Co-op Housing Federation of BC. Hello, Tom. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Were you aware of this development?
We've had this development on the table for quite some time. It's part of the original 7-site portfolio that the city is working with the Community Land Trust of BC to develop. But this announcement means that we'll be able to proceed more quickly and with more assurance that the outcome will be affordable for middle-income people.
What are your thoughts on this being selected to be fast-tracked?
Well, we've said for the longest time that housing co-ops are in some ways the best kept secret in the housing ecosystem. We need more co-ops. The waiting lists in co-ops show us that. So we're very pleased that, given that we're ready to go on this site, you heard that we'll be digging and getting underway by the summer. We think it's very timely.
You know, the premier mentioned somebody always knows someone. I know someone. We were just talking on the weekend who lives in a co-op, and they said the wait list was more than a decade. I mean, what is the need for
Yeah.
co-ops in BC?
It's dramatic, and you're right. In fact, many co-ops have just closed their waiting lists because they feel it's just not fair to say to someone, we'll have a home for you in 10 years. That's the supply crisis that we're dealing with right now. And we've said for quite some time that it's going to take all three levels of government to solve the housing crisis. And today is a very encouraging example of the municipal, provincial, and federal governments coming together to announce a dramatic solution to the problem we're facing.
You mentioned 7 sites are part of the what's projected for co-op developments. I mean, tell us about when that the building of co-ops slowed down. You know, what is the history there?
Well, there was one dramatic event that is really the cause of much of the housing challenges that you see people talking about. And you have to go all the way back to the early 90s. In 1992, the federal government, which up to that point had been very active in building out a social housing sector with co-ops and nonprofits and indigenous-led housing in the country, simply decided to get out of the housing business altogether and devolved that responsibility to the provinces, but they didn't devolve the financial resources to pick up that mantle and carry on. So we're now digging ourselves out of the hole that was created literally by 2 decades of federal inaction in housing. So very, very encouraging to see the federal government come forward with today's announcement.
And for those who, you know, have forgotten or just aren't aware, how exactly do co-ops work?
Well, co-ops are legal associations that own housing for their members. So when you move into a co-op, you're not an owner and you're not a tenant. You own the association that owns the housing. So in effect, you're your own landlord and tenant. So co-ops elect boards of directors. They govern the affairs of the co-op. But most importantly in BC, for the most part, they operate on a not-for-profit basis. So you'll see some of the co-ops around town that were built in the 80s and early 90s under those federal co-op housing programs. They're now operating at a cost that delivers housing at roughly 60% of the cost of rental housing in the same market. And that's what makes it possible for co-ops not only to develop very supportive, diverse communities, but to make them affordable for everyone, regardless of their means or their circumstances.
So today, the Prime Minister announced $2 billion for overall the BC Builds program, which includes, you know, several developments at this point and more to come. And they announced, you know, as part of that, this co-op in Vancouver. Would you like to see more direct federal involvement in building more of that, you know, rental housing, specific rental housing?
Oh, I sure would. And, you know, the impact can be quite dramatic. I know the Premier and Minister Callan here in BC have been saying, based on the historic investment they're making in affordable housing, they've been saying for the better part of a year or more to the federal government, please come and match the investment we're making. And $2 billion in construction financing will make a dent in the supply of affordable housing, no doubt about it. But you'll notice that the province is actually putting in almost $1 billion in addition to that financing in the form of grants to make the homes that are being built even more affordable. So if there's anything I'd like to ask the federal government to do, it's to match all of the BC Builds program components, the affordable construction financing, but also grants to make the homes that are being built more deeply affordable to the people who need them most.
Right, because the financing is one aspect of it in terms of providing loans.
Yes, exactly. I mean, this program does address some of the very key drivers in housing affordability. We talk about the price of land. Well, this is public land, in this case, municipal land. We talk about the cost of debt, and the construction financing addresses that. But we also talk about the municipal approval process, and this program does put some pretty aggressive targets on municipal approvals to get housing delivered in that 12 to 18 month time frame. So really the only missing piece from the federal point of view at this point would be grants to make those homes even more affordable. But I have to say, in terms of a well-rounded supply program to get more affordable housing delivered into the market as quickly as possible, this is a great start.
Tom, very good to speak with you today. Thanks for taking our call.
My pleasure.
Tom Armstrong is with the Co-op Housing Federation of BC, and we're going to take your calls on this as well in the next few minutes here. We're asking you, how are you feeling about these announcements? How will they impact your own cost of living? How do you manage the stress that comes from trying to meet your financial demands? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. It's now 12:16, 1:16 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today. And Premier David Eby was joined by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau this morning. And here is Trudeau now describing that $2 billion funding for the BC Builds program.
Last week, Premier Eby announced an ambitious and fundamentally practical new housing program that is going to turn underused public and nonprofit land into affordable rental housing for the middle class. They've started with over 20 different sites where they will take parking lots, underused land around healthcare facilities, potential buildings on top of daycares, and work with partners to build apartments that meet the needs of middle-class Canadians and their families. Part of that is working hand in hand with First Nations, but let's remember that these won't be your typical tiny one-bedroom units that have been popping up across downtowns across the country. These will be units of all sizes, including up to 3 or 4 bedrooms, the kind of places where families can grow and they can call home. And well, our government thinks this is exactly the kind of visionary, progressive housing solution that people need. BC is providing $2 billion in low-cost loans so we can build more homes for the middle class faster. And the federal government is now doubling that funding, putting another $2 billion from the federal government's apartment construction loan program into BC Builds. This will support, at a minimum, 8,000 to 10,000 new homes over the next few years, with more to come as even more land is secured.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau speaking this morning. We're talking about what impact an additional $2 billion in federal funding may have for people in this province when it comes to housing. A new StatsCan survey has revealed that Canadian renters report lower quality of life compared to homeowners, and renters in Vancouver and Toronto specifically report that. So, well, we are asking you, what do you feel about the impact of these housing announcements that you're hearing, and how are you affected? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. We're going to hear from the Family Services of Greater Vancouver in just a moment. But first up, Richard has been waiting to comment in Vancouver. Thanks for calling in, Richard.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. What do you make of these announcements, and how are you affected?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that there should be more housing for people who are on low disabilities, or people who are seniors, or people in wheelchairs. Sure, it's fine that they're doing the family co-ops, but I think there should be more housing for people who are on low income and seniors, and also people who are on disabilities.
Okay. And what brings you to this issue, Richard? Why does this matter so much to you?
Well, I have a senior mom, and her housing right now isn't very good. And so I think that there should be more housing for people with seniors, along with, like myself, being on a disability pension. I think that there should be more housing for people like that. I don't think there's enough housing for low-income people and people on disabilities.
What are the biggest challenges for yourself and your mom?
Well, my mom, she had a stroke last year, and so she's in a wheelchair. And so she can't get around right now that good. So there's no ramps for her. There's stairs, okay? And so it's hard for her to get mobile.
Yeah.
For myself, I'm lucky that I live in affordable housing, and I've been here for a while. But again, I think there should be more housing for those kind of people.
Accessibility in housing as well. I know that we've heard a lot about how
Yeah.
hard it is to find those units. Richard, really good to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for taking my call. Have a good afternoon.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Take care. That's Richard in Vancouver. We have an email now as well from Steve, who writes, my family and I have lived in housing co-ops since the more than 20 years, and we could not have lived in Vancouver otherwise. So glad to hear that the federal government is getting back into funding co-ops. They could still do more than what they are offering now. And that's Stephen East Van. Thank you very much for your email as well, Steve. Our numbers again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone, asking you, what do you make of all these housing announcements that we're hearing about? It is BC Budget Week. The throne speech is coming up this afternoon at 2 p.m. in Victoria. An election year as well. So what kind of attention do you want on housing, and how are you affected by housing costs and by these announcements? Joining us now is Murray Baker, who's a financial empowerment manager from Family Services of Greater Vancouver. Murray, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We also saw this survey, right, that just kind of brings it to bear, how people are feeling and what kind of pressure housing costs place on younger Canadians, as StatScan said, and renters in particular in Vancouver. How does that compare with what you see at Family Services of Greater Vancouver?
Yeah, it's very, very consistent with what we're seeing in terms of people having difficulty affording their housing. And we've seen, certainly in BC and Vancouver in particular, a large number of renters being displaced because their landlord, for example, may not be able to afford the mortgage payments, so they're selling their place, in which case they're oftentimes evicted and being forced to find housing, oftentimes at 40 to 60% more than what they were paying.
Wow. And so when it comes to that financial stress, what are the impacts of that?
Well, the stress, it is a financial issue, but it's much broader than that. It really impacts people's mental health. It creates stress in the family. Obviously, if you're stressing whether you're going to have enough money to pay for food, to feed your family, to make sure your kids are in activities, all of that creates huge stress. It can create conflict in terms of relationships. It also has an impact on overall mental health. It can trigger things such as depression, anxiety, obviously. And for those susceptible to addiction issues, it can certainly aggravate those types of issues as well. So it really has a broad impact beyond just the financial realm.
Okay, Murray Baker joins me now from the Family Services of Greater Vancouver. And we're asking you your reaction to these housing announcements you're hearing about, and what is the impact of that cost pressure on you. Our number, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. Charles is joining us now from Nelson. Hi, Charles, welcome.
Today.
And what are your thoughts on what the province and the federal government have talked about today when it comes to housing? Does that meet your need?
I don't think so. I don't think that it addresses the needs of middle-class Canadians. I think we're looking at a project that lends a substantial amount of taxpayer money, and the property ownership ends up in the hands of a select few again. What working class and families in Canada want is to be able to own homes. We want our own autonomy. That $2 billion repurposed as low-interest mortgages for working class people, I think would make a lot more sense. And it would give citizens the autonomy that they're truly craving. We don't want to give $2,000 a month to a landlord. We want to invest $2,000 a month in ourselves, and we just would like the opportunity to do so as other generations have had.
That's really interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about your own situation?
I am a ticketed carpenter living and working full-time in Nelson, BC. So to give an idea, that like a full ticket tradesman working what I do makes about $70,000 a year, and that means that home ownership for me personally will always be out of reach unless the government intervenes in a similar way that we did post-World War II, which is to use our collective tax money to create homes that end up owned by the population, and not just 3 or 4 rich people, but individuals in our community.
Yeah, those interest rates must feel pretty daunting right now then.
Yeah, it's impossible. It's not tenable. I mean, you say the median income in Canada is $40,000 a year, which puts most Canadians living right on the poverty line right now. So it's not tenable in the long term.
Charles, I'm really glad you called. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks so much for having me.
Take care. That's Charles in Nelson. And Jeff wrote us as well from North Saanich. We need to actually discuss and debate our national public policy on immigration rates. Of course, we need a steady level of immigration, but it seems we're not allowed to talk about it. It's always dealing with the symptoms instead of debating the root causes. Jeff, thank you very much for that email as well. And another email here as well from Marnie. And I'm just going to scroll down to it. And Marnie writes, this is with regard to the BC Builds program. The problem for many people is that the low point of the, quote, middle income or middle class income has been set at more than $84,000. There's a big gap between those who need assisted housing and those who have an income greater than $84,000. What housing is available for those in between? Thank you very much for that as well. And the BC Builds program is designed to create housing for rent for household incomes from $84,780 to $131,950. That is for a studio or 1-bedroom home. It goes up with units of more bedrooms. Marie, we just heard there the frustration, right? So yes, they're talking about rentals, but what about that feeling of not being able to own a home, that sort of despair of, you're never just going to be able to do that. What actually is the government doing about that? Do you hear from families who just feel the same way?
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly among young people, a clear frustration that there's just not the accessibility to housing, to buy housing. I do think that the co-op housing is a good start in terms of it brings down the rental rates and allows people to put aside some money for perhaps a future purchase of a condo or a house. So I think that is a good start, but definitely we do need more additional housing. Certainly the government brought into practice the first homeowner saving plan, which is certainly a good program in terms of allowing people to put money aside for their first housing purchase. But at the same time, you really need that supply increase to make that more affordable rather than just focusing on the demand side.
Let's take one last call here from Jamie in Vancouver before we wrap up this segment. Hi, Jamie.
Hi. I just wanted to say I'm a mom of 2 young kids. We're on a single income. I stay home with the kids. And we got displaced when my second child was born. Literally, like 2 days before I delivered her, we found out we had to move out of our rental place because they were selling. And we had to take on a rent of $1,100 more a month and that was after looking at like 50 or 60 places, which was very hard. Co-op lists are crazy. It's basically impossible to even get on one. And a lot of the new co-ops that are being built are just so tiny for people with families that it's literally like it doesn't really make sense to move into a 500 square foot space with no access to a yard or anything. So I think more townhouse type co-op housing being built, more affordable housing being built that, like as somebody that was born in Vancouver and raised in Vancouver, it's it's a pipe dream now to afford anything here, even if you move way out to the suburbs. So I think, coming up with some kind of way to build housing that people can afford to buy too.
That's what Charles was talking about in Nelson as well, right?
Yeah, it's just it's really hard because it's forcing people out of the city who grew up here, who want to live here, and
want to work here. Yeah.
And my husband, he has multiple businesses here. We can't just pack up and leave because then we don't have a source of income, So I think it's, and we're better than most. There's a lot of people that are way, way lower income than we are, families that can't even afford to live at all. And, I do want to touch on Richard as well, what he said about, seniors and disabilities. I mean, that's a problem as well. My parents are, 69 and 70 and can't retire because the cost of living is so high right now.
Yeah. Jamie, thank you so much. And I can hear one of your children in the background.
Yeah, my daughter.
You were able to get away for one moment.
I'm actually in the car.
Thanks for the call.
Okay, thank you so much.
Take
Have
care.
a good day.
All the best. That's Jamie in Vancouver. Anything you'll be looking for in the budget, Murray, that could help?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're really pushing for is more supports for community-based financial empowerment. Services like ourselves that what we do is help people who are struggling this way to access benefits they may not be receiving. So for example, a senior that is struggling to make the rent, if we can connect them to the SAFER grant, which helps offset the cost of their monthly rent, that's something that makes a huge difference in terms of affordability. But other grants, certainly utilizing things such as the rent bank rather than falling into the trap of using predatory lenders to make ends meet. All of these things can really make a huge difference in terms of the struggles that people are currently having to afford housing and also food.
Food is the other one, isn't it? We've certainly heard those struggles this afternoon. Murray, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you.
Thanks very much for having me.
Murray Baker is the Financial Empowerment Manager with Family Services of Greater Vancouver. It's 12:33, 1:33 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC. And coming up in our next half hour, we'll talk more about finances, and this time about how you tackle your own money, your household finances, as a couple. How do you approach that conversation? Can be hard sometimes. We'll take your calls on that coming up after the CBC News Update with Zara Premji.
Good afternoon. The BC government will be outlining its plan for the upcoming legislative session today in the throne speech. The speech will set out the government's goals and priorities. Government House Leader Ravi Kahlon says the focus will be on housing, healthcare, and cost of living. The government is also expected to introduce a new real estate flipping tax this legislative session. And RCMP say 2 teens have been charged over a shooting at a home in Surrey, and investigators have found no link to foreign interference. A group advocating for Sikh independence had said the target of the February 1st shooting was a member of their movement, and the group believed India was involved. But a statement from Surrey RCMP says investigators have not established any links to foreign interference in the shots being fired at a home on 154th Street. It says 2 16-year-olds were arrested on February 12th and are being held in custody as they await their next court appearance. Now a look at the BC weather. For the North Coast, mainly sunny today with the high near 6. For the Peace region, a mix of sun and cloud and a chance of flurries, the high sitting around 3 degrees. For the central interior, cloudy with a few flurries as well and a high of -2. For the Boundary and Kootenay regions, cloudy with a chance of isolated showers or flurries and a high of 5 degrees. For the Okanagan and southern interior, mainly cloudy today, the high sitting near 7 degrees. Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, mainly cloudy but some periods of rain and the high near 10. That's your CBC News Update from Vancouver.
Thank you, Zara. It is a busy, busy week.
It really is,
In
Michelle.
news, yeah, we have the throne speech coming up this afternoon. We'll carry that live for you, of course, on our website, cbc.ca/BC. Lieutenant Governor Janet Austin will deliver the throne speech that will say what the province's priorities will be for
Right.
this sitting. And then on Thursday is BC Budget Day.
Yes, and we've got the Prime Minister here. There's so
Today,
much.
yeah, it's a lot. And just a note that I'll be hosting our BC Budget Special on Thursday as well. I'll be crunching numbers.
I'll be tuned in. Now, don't miscalculate anything.
Yeah, exactly. You can double check my numbers.
There you go.
I'll be relying on experts to do that. Very much so. Zara, thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle.
Zara Premji in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. Then thanks for joining us here on CBC Radio 1. This is BC Today, of course, and really glad to have you with us. We'll be talking a lot about the budget, of course. So again, this afternoon, the throne speech will be delivered by the Lieutenant Governor, and that will be at 2 p.m. this afternoon. You can go to our website to watch that if you're watching us now. That again is cbc.ca/BC. Lots of coverage on the throne speech this afternoon, of course, on CBC Radio, tonight on CBC Television, and all through the day. You can just check our website for all those nuggets from the throne speech. And coming up on Thursday will be the BC budget coming up. I think it will be 1:30, and so we'll have our special starting at 1 p.m. right after BC Today. Give you an extended edition of the program, and we'll take your calls on your reaction to the provincial budget as well. Welcome back to BC Today on CBC Radio 1, as well as CBC Television, live streaming as well on our YouTube page, CBC Vancouver, our website, cbc.ca/BC, or you can use the CBC News app. I'm Michelle Eliot. Nice to be with you this Tuesday afternoon. I hope you had a good family day weekend. We're going to talk more about finances, and this time at your own budget, your own spending, and investment plans. And what about for yourself and your spouse or your partner? How do you approach that conversation? Money can be one of the most difficult things to talk about with your partner, right? So we want to hear from you. When have you started that conversation? How do you approach talking to your partner about money? How do you approach finances as a couple? If you have any tips, any questions, we would love to hear from you. Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Now, you can also text us your tips, your questions at 236-330-2623. That's 236-330-2623. And I'm pleased to welcome my guests for this segment, Steph Gordon and Dennis Matthew. They are digital content creators. They talk about finances and budgeting, and you can catch them on Steph and Den on social media. They join me now from Toronto. Hello.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Oh, thanks for joining us. I have to say, I've been watching you for a little while and following your videos. I mean, you have a lot, more than 100,000 subscribers on YouTube?
We do.
Hit that earlier this year, which was exciting.
Oh, that is exciting. So you're what we call finfluencers, financial influencers?
I guess so. We always say personal finance creators, but yeah, that's like the fun short form version.
Right. But you do have backgrounds in finance. Why don't you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So for me, I actually started out my career as an accountant at Deloitte. So that's where I was working up until 2021 when we took the leap to becoming content creators.
Full time instead, yeah.
Right.
And I worked at PwC at the time. I actually worked in the human capital side of things. So when we first started our channel, we really merged the salary portion of money and then what to do with that money that you make from your job. And that's kind of how we got started. And then now we're all personal finance all the time, full time.
Right. How did you come to start putting together money content in the first place?
Good question.
Yeah.
For us, it was a big piece, getting right into the couple piece too. When we met, we talked about money all the time, and it was something that was
Really?
fun for us.
It was fun for you.
It was fun for us. I feel like we just got lucky that we both were interested in those conversations right away. And then we also enjoyed doing creative stuff. Like our jobs were very corporate at the time, 9 to 5, classic corporate life. And we want to do something fun on the outside. So we started creating videos and we're like, what can we talk about that we would want to hear people our age talk about, that we know our friends are talking about, but not always with each other because money's kind of uncomfortable. So we started our videos that way about how to negotiate your salary, what to do with your first paycheck and your post-grad job, all those things. And it's really evolved from there.
Wow. And how, what's your perspective on that story, Den?
Yeah, well, obviously money is one of those topics that comes off as extremely taboo. And I think that we all come from a varying, like a variety of different backgrounds, right? So we all have our own personal relationships with money. And I think for us, despite us coming from clearly different backgrounds, money was just one of those topics that was important to the both of us. And I think it created a really great foundation for our relationship moving forward.
Wow. I'm still stunned by you saying we wanted to talk about money. It was fun. We had actually a caller in our last half hour who was a younger person and just really frustrated that it seemed like being the ability to purchase a home just seemed like it would never become a reality. I mean, you're young people. What do you come across when it comes to young followers on how they are feeling about money?
Oh, good question. The housing and real estate thing is its own entire massive conversation because I feel like everyone can relate to that feeling. And money in general, I think that's the biggest thing. A comment that we get all the time on our channel is people being like, wow, I'm so excited to find a channel with other young people, specifically young Canadians, because there's not as many Canadians out there talking about personal finance. And they'll say, I'm so excited to find someone talking about this because either they like to talk about it or they have questions and they don't know who to go to, whether that's their family or their friends because people aren't talking about it. So it's that like quiet feeling where you don't know who to go to. Otherwise, in terms of what's going on.
Well, I think the fact that there are people who are asking these questions and thinking about what they could be doing, that's an amazing first step. Some of the things that we talk about on our channel are obviously some of the tools that you can be using when it comes to investing. If your goal is ultimately to buy a house. Now, when we talk about the cost of living across the country right now, it's extremely high. It's extremely high. So we're all as young people going through sort of that same feeling and emotion where we're all feeling like we're trapped in a way,
I think the other thing I wanted to add on there too is I feel like it's a couple of things put together. People lack confidence with money to begin with, and then you hear all this news and all this information that sounds negative and scary. You'll hear that you're never gonna be able to buy a house, that you need millions of dollars for retirement, all these things that whether they're true or not, it just sounds very like, I just don't even want to touch that. I don't want to figure out money because it sounds too scary. It's not gonna make me feel good. So that lack of confidence and then the negative things around it make people want to avoid it and not think about it when really the best thing you can do is grow your confidence and your knowledge. That's only going to help you.
Okay, grow your confidence and your knowledge. And that's what we'll talk about in a couple of moments here with my guests, Steph Gordon and Dan Matthew. They are digital content creators. They talk all about finances and budgeting. And they are at Steph and Den on social media, on TikTok, on YouTube, on Instagram, and they're joining me from Toronto to talk about how to tackle money as a couple. So we're asking you, what is your own advice? How do you perhaps split your finances with your partner? How do you talk and discuss money with your partner? Do you sit down once a week and look at your expenses and your budget? And how do you do it? And how do you perhaps avoid or work through any money conflicts, so you have different approaches to money? Love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. By email, we're at bctoday@cbc.ca. And you can text us as well. If you just want to text us a quick tip or a quick question for Steph and Den, our number is 236-330-2623. 236-330-2623. Joanne wrote us to say, finances between us today, nothing like it was in our first marriages. Statistically on the scale, our first marriages failed because of finances and spending. You can discuss this during the honeymoon stage, not the breakdown. Leaving it to assumption and perception is a big mistake because it is guaranteed to be a future problem. Wow, really interesting. Yes, don't wait. Don't put it off as the elephant in the room. Even when you're in the honeymoon phase, tackle it. Steph, then, when would you suggest this come up in a relationship?
So the way that we look at it is that you should be having these conversations as early and as often as possible. When we look at being in a partnership, if your ultimate goal is to work towards having this shared vision, then the same way that you have banter as a couple, the same way that you talk about, for example, like your favorite show that you guys are both watching, that is the goal of how you ultimately want to feel when you're having these money conversations. And I think for a lot of people, it's going to take a lot of, individual work that needs to be done, where we need to peel back years and years worth of layers that we've all built up. And we need to ask ourselves why we have certain thoughts when it comes to money conversations.
Definitely. I feel like too, I was thinking about this earlier, that you're having conversations about money with your partner, whether you're on the first date or you're in a committed relationship later on, you're having conversations in your head with that person anyway. Things that they do, habits that you observe from them, whether that's them paying bills, doing a lot of shopping, whatever it might be, anything that's a day-to-day thing that involves money, you're then making assumptions about what that means about their money, what their salary might be. Their money habits, but your assumptions are coming from your background, touching on how people have their own different baggage that they have to unravel. Based on my personal experience, I'm putting those assumptions on this person who has a totally different experience and upbringing with money. So the earlier you can talk about these things, even just the small stuff, the better it's going to be for that foundation.
Definitely.
And I love what you talked about, what you just said, and which is work on yourself first. And Steph, you touched earlier on how little we know generally about handling money. I've heard so many times that we need more financial literacy. So what is it that people could be working on first, just to get a handle on their own, money attitudes and what their own goals are before they even approach that conversation? What should they know? What should they get sorted first?
That's a great question. I feel like the biggest first piece isn't even actually any action in terms of tangible things with money. It's more sitting in yourself and thinking through what your background is. What is your relationship with money? On our hand, we were people who talked about money with each other early, which helped. Also doing our channel helped unpack more quicker than I might have otherwise in my life. But it's simple stuff. It's like, okay, I'm afraid of debt because of XYZ that my parents did. Or I'm the opposite. I spend a lot because a lot of it is impacted from your childhood and what your parents did or did not do with money. So writing it out, I think, is helpful. Brain dumping all your thoughts on all these different financial topics. And then you're able to actually tackle those and sort through what you need to do from there. I think that's the biggest first step.
And I think, some of us, I'm sure we've heard the term scarcity, right? Like some of us have what you would call a scarcity mindset when it comes to day-to-day money conversations. So when we're looking at, for example, conversations that me and Steph have had around, some of the things that I personally would do, like, trying to preserve everything for as long as possible. That's something that I do.
The most out of that toothpaste tube, the shampoo bottle, add some water.
Never throwing out a pair of pants in case you wear it, even though I haven't seen you wear it in literally 7 years. Things like that. That's a big one. I think the other big piece off the bat for people to know that I'd love to share with people too is that people think that everyone else knows more than them when it comes to money. Spoiler, they don't. Hopefully they are growing in their own personal journeys, but wherever you're at, you need to know that you can grow that confidence over time. So even if you do that brain dump and figure out where you're at based on your past with money, it doesn't matter how far behind you feel. You'll be able to grow that confidence quickly if you feel like you can and just get started. Then you get into the more tangible stuff, right? The basics from there is figuring out what your first step needs to be. There's different, what we call the money steps, right? First is tackling high interest debt, an emergency fund, creating a budget and all that stuff. But those are the things you do need to do for yourself first, and be communicative with your partner as you're working through that if you're already in a relationship.
Yeah, and touching on the, the couple piece, ultimately the details on how you actually go about doing things, the actual granular details are going to be different depending on the couple. And for us, the way that we look at it is that ultimately despite how you tackle the details, the most important thing is how you're having conversations around, what your goals are, what your shared vision is, and how we can work towards that as a couple. And, I look at different instances where, you want to avoid situations where there's, micromanaging behavior or, resentment. In order to avoid those things, right? Like we really need to prioritize having these conversations
Open communication
as early and as often as possible.
Yeah.
Go
ahead. Sorry.
When I look at even some couples who have, for example, a joint bank account, right? A lot of issues will arise when you have one individual who is, quote unquote, managing the finances and, policing what the other partner does, right? When we're having conversations consistently and, and we're open about things and we're both aware of what our ultimate goals are and where we want to be, then that coffee might not matter as much.
Right. Do you have a guideline for how often then? Do you sit down at a certain day of the week with coffee and go over finances?
Yeah, good question. I think so day to day talking about things just as they come up, I think is important, but I think it's more important to set those specific times you're going to talk about it, especially if you don't just happen to be two people who like talking about money, because that doesn't happen that often. A lot of the time someone is driving it, or neither person in the relationship is driving it. You both just know you have to. For us, we think it's either the last day of the month or the first day of the month, pretty much back to back there. We have monthly budgets that we go through. It's such an easy time to go through, review your budgets for the month, talk about what's coming up. You can talk about big picture goals. You can kind of have an agenda for yourself. You can make it fun. I think when people talk about money dates and just getting into these granular details, it sounds really boring or really intimidating. Make it fun, make it lighthearted, talk about it. Everything should be future oriented. So instead of being upset at yourself for what you did last month, now you have the information.
Yep.
Information is power. Knowledge is power. Now what can you do better next month? If you never looked at it, I think also people think really quickly that if they know what's going on with their money, they're more stressed out because they're mad at the decisions they made. It's much more stressful to not know what's happening with money than to know.
Maybe perhaps don't call it money date. That maybe make it a little bit more romantic. Let's put out the numbers again. I'm asking you, how do you approach talking to your partner about money? What are your goals? How do you approach finances as a couple? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Pound 690 on your cell phone. Now, you can also text us at 236-330-2623. And Sarah from Langley texted, I'm a 55-year-old woman and divorced. When dating and things started getting serious, I ask about finances, whether he spends or saves. In the past, it was taboo to ask about money and debt, and she's wondering if it's more acceptable these days to ask. And Scott from Nelson texted as well, my wife and I have been budgeting for 10 years now, and they use a certain software for it. We can't fathom not sitting down monthly to determine which envelope our money goes to. It takes so much stress off of our relationship, but it is work. It takes time to build up the habit, but it's so worth it. It creates a shared vision of what we are saving for, like trips or savings, even a new fridge. But we have one category each we set aside for no guilt spending for ourselves. Money we can use on ourselves without consulting the other person. I love that. Oh my goodness. It's exactly what you were talking about. Go through everything, put things in envelopes, as he says. What are you going to put certain funds to? And then the no guilt spending. This you've got free leeway on that particular part of the budget.
I think that's so important, individual budgeting or as a couple, and then hopefully those flow together, this is the order we kind of like to budget. Your needs first, your fixed expenses, housing, the things that you need to have, food maybe, right? The stuff that you need in order to live. Then put towards your financial goals, whether that is paying off debt, whether that's a certain savings goals for something you're saving up for, maybe it's buying a house, maybe it's investing for retirement. Hit those goals first on a monthly basis, and then whatever's left over becomes guilt-free because you've already hit your goals first. And then you also, when it comes to a relationship, you have to be aware that as long as your partner is setting their goals that you've decided on and you guys are being honest with each other, let them spend in those guilt-free ways.
Let them get that coffee. Val writes, early in the relationship, discuss how you grew up. And you were talking about this earlier as well, right? How you grew up and what they learned through their families. Set aside the basics of your understanding of money and spending habits. And yes, we all grow up with certain influences from our own families. And so what advice would you have for that budget then? Because things are shrinking, incomes are not keeping up with expenses. So people may say, yeah, it sounds great to budget, but oh my gosh, I don't have enough to go around.
Totally. We get that comment a lot too. I feel like we have a free budget template. If anyone is interested, we have that because it's the exact same one that we use. I think the biggest thing though is people say that before they start budgeting. I do think a lot of people who are like, yeah, that sounds great, I just don't even have enough, do the exercise. Because even if it's only a few dollars, like it doesn't matter what it is that you're putting towards your financial goals, whatever you have, you can then set your other goals from that. You're never going to get out of that trap of feeling, I guess it's kind of the scarcity mindset, or maybe it's the realistic mindset that you actually don't have enough to go around. Things are extremely expensive. But what can you do? It's more empowering again to have that knowledge.
Yeah. Once you have the information actually laid out for you, then it makes decision making that much easier, right? You might realize that, you know what, maybe you're right. You don't have as much money as you would like. And maybe that means then we start looking into how we can increase that income, right? Then we can maybe start having that conversation.
And if you're having this conversation with your partner, you have a teammate that's there with you and figuring it out together. I think a lot of the time in relationships, when there's one person who's the money person, it's not only bad for the person who's not involved because there's concerns that you don't know what's going on with your money. For the person who is the money person, that's a lot of stress to be on one person. To have a teammate who can understand what you're going through as a relationship, as a family, that's really helpful too. So you can have those conversations. Sometimes they're not the most fun.
Just make sure you're on the same team is what you're getting at. You know, what's interesting, in our last half hour, we were talking about how, money stressors are not just financial stresses. They go to your mental health and relationships as well. So this is such a great start at getting people to look at that and make sure that their relationship stays healthy as they deal with all the money stresses too. Real pleasure to talk to you. I'll continue to follow you on social media. Thanks so much for the time, Steph and Den.
Thank you so much.
Steph Gordon and Denise Mathieu, digital content creators on finances and budgeting. They're Steph and Den on social media.